Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to review this album from Bob Dylan, Highway 61. Don't know why it's taken me so long to review. It is one of his finest records. Maybe I've been guilty over the years of taking it for granted. It's always been up there. It's always ranked highly, not just by me, but by Rolling Stone and whichever poll is out there. I remember the Paul Gambaccini's Top 100 Albums of All Time from 77 placed this album at number 3, I think it was. Blonde on Blonde was number 2. Sgt. Pepper was number 1. Astral Weeks was number 4. Rubber Soul was number 5. Revolver was number 6. I remember the top 6 by heart. So that was good. So this album, I mean, it's staggering to think that it came out in August of 65. If you think about it, the Beatles released Help at the same time, and for the most part the Beatles were only really beginning to progress in terms of becoming more introverted and more interesting lyrically, because Help still included covers of Dizzy Miss Lizzy and straight love songs like It's Only Love and The Night Before, and there was a hint of things to come on Help, like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, which is a Dylan influenced song. But nothing compared to the groundbreaking lyrics of this song. The lyrics are way ahead of any of his rivals at the time. Starting off with the stupendous Like a Rolling Stone, which Rolling Stone actually voted the number 1 best song of all time in a recent poll. It reached top 10 for sure on both sides of the Atlantic. I think it was number 2 in the US. The album got to number 4 in the UK and number 3 in the US. It's interesting how the musicians were not credited on my original vinyl, but on the CD they are. And this picture of Bob on the piano is not on the vinyl either. So rather unhelpfully, the record doesn't say who's playing what, but the CD, Bob Dylan guitar, harmonica, piano and police car. I guess that's the sound on Highway 61 title track. Mike Bloomfield on guitar, Alan Cooper on organ and piano, who plays that superb organ riff on Rolling Stone, Paul Griffin piano and organ, Bobby Gregg drums, Harvey Goldstein bass, Charlie McCoy, the famous Nashville guitarist, on guitar, Frank Owens on piano, Russ Savakis on bass. So, yeah, Rolling Stone, what a way to open an album. Just mind-blowing as a song, and if it's not one's favourite Dylan song, it's got to be up there, because it's just, and you know, maybe it's a bit unpleasant. I'm not sure who it's aimed at. I'm not sure if he's admitted who it's aimed at, but I think it was as a result of him being a bit disillusioned by touring relentlessly, which he'd done for the previous 3 or 4 years, and just writing, I think he called it 10 or 20 verses of vitriol, which he then shortened and made it into this song. Whoever is on the receiving end of it, it's not very pleasant, but as a generic kind of song, aimed at whoever you want it to aim it at, really. It works brilliantly. Interesting cover, by the way. I could probably tell you a few things about the cover, but I forgot to look it up. It's another one of his cool covers, a bit like Bringing It All Back Home was a cool cover as well. So starts off brilliantly. Then Tombstone Blues is a pretty decent rocker to carry on the album, with the rock approach which he began on side 1 of Bringing It All Back Home and upset the folk purists. He was continuing it here. The guitarist Mike Bloomfield is on great form throughout the album, and it's a great stomping rocker, and it takes a lot to laugh, takes a train to cry. Apparently he'd recorded this fast with the band and decided to slow it down while they were taking a lunch break, and kind of transforms the song. I think one of the critics here says it transformed it. I can't remember if I can find transforms it from an insufferably smart Alec number into a slow, tender, sensual anthem. So I think this album was well received at the time. I'm sure it was, rightly so, and sold well. So it takes a lot to laugh. Famously performed at Bangladesh, August the 1st, 1971, New York, Madison Square Garden, where he did it beautifully. From a Brick 6 is a kind of another stomping rocker, not quite so memorable as Tombstone Blues, but decent. And then Ballad of a Thin Man is, again, just a bit like a Rolling Stone. This side one is top and tailed by absolute classics, and Bob plays the piano here, which is quite unusual. I don't think he played it much on the first few albums, but he would play it in his career a lot more than up to this point. I'm thinking particularly of New Morning and Shot of Love. He's playing on Lenny Bruce, and well, quite a few albums I think he's playing piano on. I wouldn't like to name all of them. And then in concert, when I saw him in 2002 in Budapest, he was playing piano almost throughout the concert and playing pretty competently. I mean, he has a basic style. He doesn't play the frilly, twiddly bits, but in terms of playing the chords, he has a very distinctive style. And I think one critic called it leaden when describing the track Isis from Desire. But I think, the simplicity of Bob's piano playing is all that's needed on certain songs, and Ballad of a Thin Man is a classic example where you wouldn't really want Richard Clayderman or someone playing tinkly piano on this number. You just want the chords, and that's what you get. And it's all about a character called Mr. Jones, who was famously referenced in Yer Blues by John Lennon on the White Album. Feels so suicidal, just like Dylan's Mr. Jones. So that's interesting. Side 2 opens with Queen Jane, approximately, just a gorgeous ballad. Not sure who it's about, but it works really well. And this would point the way to some of the ballads on Blonde on Blonde, such as Visions of Johanna, reminds me a bit of that. It's pretty amazing to think that Blonde on Blonde, this album, and Bringing It All Back Home came out within, I think it's a 15-month period of each other. Absolutely staggering. Highway 61, the title track, where Dylan's playing this siren, is quite interesting because he's talking about God asking Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Dylan's father in real life was called Abraham, so that's an interesting bit of info. He performed this song in '84 when I saw him at Wembley, I remember, and he performs it regularly. It's quite a go-to song for Bob. By the way, I was thinking how the hell he remembers the lyrics to his songs when he does all these songs in concert, because he constantly changes his repertoire. Or maybe he doesn't so much anymore, but throughout the years he's always changed his repertoire, and I don't believe he's ever used these cue cards or these crib sheets like some. I was watching a concert, I think it was the George Fest recently, where every single person, when they were covering a George song, was reading the lyrics from the auto cue down on the floor, quite obviously, not very subtly. But I don't believe Bob's ever done that, so he must have a staggering memory, because a song like Tangled Up in Blue alone is quite a long one to remember, and not to mention Hard Rain's Gonna Fall and countless other songs he's written with these lengthy and numerous verses. Anyway, that was a bit of a sidetrack. Just like Tom Thumb's Blues is another good upbeat rocker, and then the album closes with the only acoustic number from the album, Desolation Row. And I was reading in the top 100 Dylan songs of all time magazine I got recently, Mick Jagger was commenting on this particular song and saying how brilliant it was. So there's no question that Dylan was being listened to by all his peers and being seriously admired, because this album is, I think one person said it's the whole of the rock scene, post the arrival of the Beatles. It all really started with this album, and there's not many albums. I think another reviewer said not many albums where it really pushes the boundaries and shows people what can be done. And I think Rubber Soul and Revolver are mentioned in the same breath as this album. One review said it showcased Dylan's seething, not quite out of control vocal delivery and a rough and tumble instrumental attack, as well as his transformation from a folk singer to a rock and roller. One other review says, revolutionary and stunning, not just for its energy and panache, but in its vision, fusing radical electrical music with lyrics that were light years ahead of anyone else's. Dylan here unites the force of blues-based rock and roll with the power of poetry. The whole rock culture, the whole post-Beatle pop rock world, and so in an important sense the 1960s started here. That was the quote I was referring to. And by the way, Highway 61 Revisited, it's named after the highway which Bob grew up travelling along. I think it originally ran from somewhere in Canada down to the music area of New Orleans or Nashville, through the American Midwest, is it? I'm not quite sure, but it's a pretty famous highway. And apparently he had problems trying to get the album called this. The record company said, why do you want to call it that? And he insisted, and eventually they conceded he could call it the album what he liked. By the way, these sleeve notes on the back, pretty incomprehensible, as featured on many a Dylan album. You don't get the lyrics, but you do get this sleeve note. And quite a long album, I think. This, I was reading, it's 50-something minutes long, I think, which is 51:26. So could almost have been a double album, not quite. So, brilliant. Thanks, Bob. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.